One of the incredible things about being in independent journalism is having this platform, this space to have real substantive conversations with experts. And Ruth Ben-Ghiat is the expert on autocracy and fascism and dictatorships. And, when you see her on cable news, it's a 6-minute maybe conversation. And the fact that I got the privilege to hang out with her for 20 minutes today was not only so illuminating for me, but I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. You're going to learn so much from it. I am grateful for just her wisdom and for her willingness to educate us on how not only we have lessons to learn from history, but she also tells us how we can stop this backslide into authoritarianism. Listen to Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat. And joining me now, I have the privilege of being able to spend time with my friend and somebody who I just admire and respect so much, Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She is the president. I just made you a president, Ruth. She's
Thank
the professor of history. You should be, frankly. You do a much better job. Professor of history and Italian studies at New York University. She's also the author of Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present. Ruth, I want to read the description of your book because it's just so on point with so much that we have going on. It's not only obviously a New York Times bestseller, but it examines how illiberal leaders use corruption, violence, propaganda, and machismo to stay in power and how resistance to them has unfolded over a century. Ruth, your book came out in 2020. The paperback version came out with a new epilogue in 2021, but it feels like it's timeless. The theories and the concepts that you cover really are. Before we get into some of the latest coming out of Brazil, though, I wanted to talk to you about these concepts, right? Because I live in Florida. I have lived in Florida since 1983. So I have seen an evolution of our communities here. And I'm always fascinated with this concept of the strongman. It is not a foreign concept to people that live in Central American and South American countries specifically. And I think it's a mindset that travels with them when they come to the United States, which is why I am always hard pressed to want to ask people from Venezuela, people from Brazil, people from Colombia. People from countries that are used to the strong men leaders. They're used to that mentality. Why are they voting for that here in the United States?
I think some of it is familiarity, even though many of those people left their countries because they saw the destruction that the strongman model of leadership creates. Part of it is this lingering idea they were socialized to, that this is when you have crises, whether they're invented or real, it's only the strongmen who can take care of it because they're more efficient. And I wrote Strongmen to debunk these myths, number one, of authoritarian efficiency. And when I've done talks on the book, readers or come up to me if they're from Venezuela or Cuba and ask me why I don't have left-wing leaders in the book other than Gaddafi. And really, it's not that I think they're any better. In fact, if we want to do body counts, communism caused far more deaths than fascism. But I really didn't see, I wrote this during Trump 1.0, and I didn't see any book that looked back and went from the days of fascism and then what happens when fascism ends to right-wing military dictatorships in Latin America and South America, and on to the present with people like Bolsonaro. And I didn't see any history of that. So that's why I chose to structure it that way to lead up to Trump.
One of the further descriptions for you, the work you're doing in the book is the following. And again, I thought it was pretty captivating in terms of what we are going through right now, or perhaps what we're suffering through. It says, ours is the age of the strong man, of heads of state who damage or destroy democracy, use masculinity as a tool of political legitimacy, and promise law and order rule, and then legitimize lawless behavior by financial, sexual, and other predators. They use propaganda, virility, corruption, and violence to stay in power. But your book is instructive on how they can be opposed. And I am always grateful for solutions, right? Because we can always, misery loves company. We can always commiserate together on the state that we find ourselves in. And I appreciate solutions, but it is remarkably chilling to me, Ruth, that description I just read, not only is it applicable to several, but we're talking about what we have right now. It's not only Trump 1.0, but in Trump 2.0. And on its face, if I read that, you would never want to sign up for that. And yet we are now currently living in exactly that state.
Yeah, well, it's a testament to how good these types of leaders are, or before they become leaders, exploiting times of crisis and transition. Like the first ones, the fascists came to power through, they were appointed to power, but they came up at a time in the ashes of World War I. And so every time there's a sense of transition and crisis, they come, it's a propitious time for these personalities who come up, and they're very good communicators, whether it was Mussolini with newsreels, Hitler with the radio, Trump and Bolsonaro with Twitter. Modi is the most followed
Right.
leader in the world today. Check out his Instagram. He even has a 3D avatar, animated avatar that shows people how to do yoga because he cares for his people so much. So they're really unbeatable. They leave Democrats in the dust, and they promise solutions, and they communicate in innovative ways. And so this has happened over and over again. And Democrats just are not as good at exploiting the moment, at seizing the moment. And that's why people vote over and over again. Now they come to power more by voting for these types of leaders, but it's very discouraging. But we can learn something from the techniques, certainly of messaging, and think about how powerful it would be if we had leaders who were expressing love and care, but they actually meant it instead of trying to just manipulate people as Trump and his cohort do.
So walk me through this analysis in real time, please, because I get criticized often, Ruth, for me underestimating, I'll use that verb, I guess, underestimating Trump in some ways. I don't find him to be particularly intellectual, like book smart. I don't find his street smarts to be that compelling either. His messaging, if you listen carefully, you really don't even have to listen carefully. He doesn't express concern for others. He airs grievances. It's not as if he's inviting others, I will take care of you. It's more, let me sit here and just bitch about how horrible this country is. He does make promises to make it better, Ruth, but like I kind of don't see the parallels between how successful other dictators have been in that regard and these promises, because I feel like Trump just brings out the worst in people and says, well, now I'm giving you the permission structure to join me in complaining about how horrible this place is.
Yeah, but they've all done that. And they all use this idea of victimhood. Mussolini used to talk about being a victim all the way up to, this crosses left and right boundaries, because and Erdogan talks about victimhood. He did it before he had a coup attempt against him in 2016, but as you can imagine, then he really souped that up. In other countries, it's not just the leader who's the victim, it's the whole country. So that's been true in Russia. There are very deeply rooted ideologies of national victimization at the hands of the West. And the same in China. That's a huge part of communist ideology, is victimization. And we're seeing the real-time effects of this now, because it's being, as I said, it's being done by today's leaders. And they use that to make arguments that whatever they do, whether it's invading Ukraine or other things, is legitimate self-defense because they are victims. They are victimized. So in doing this, Trump has just followed this groove set by other leaders, and he's been very brilliant. I think he's one of the most brilliant propagandists in history, actually. And you don't need book smarts for that. You need communications, savvy. And he had that from television. And it's interesting that a lot of the most
Wow.
successful autocrats come from backgrounds of advertising, like Bukele, or they were journalists like Mobutu and Mussolini, or they were in television like Berlusconi and Trump. So they know how to exploit fears, exploit grievances, while saying, I will take care of you. I alone can fix it.
So I'll push back gently on that, which is I understand the skill set has provided, maybe a natural entree to be able to sell. It's all in the sale, right? These are
Mm-hmm.
salesmen. They're
Mm-hmm.
incredibly skilled salesmen to be able to pitch this to people. But and I appreciate your assessment that Trump is a brilliant propagandist. But on its face, though, Trump is unintelligible though often, right? I mean, just even and the stuff that comes out of his mouth, though, even objectively, even though I obviously go in skewed with the lens of disgust for him, even objectively, a lot of times it's babbling, it's unintelligible, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
make any sense. So I kind of feel like, so how does that still work for somebody like Trump, I guess?
So the personal doctor of dictator Idi Amin, and I've read a lot of books that are looking at the psychology of these people,
Mm.
said that he was both sane and insane. And he was both
Oh.
calculating and very logical in how he went about his repression, and also completely capricious and impulsive. And I'll give an example that your viewers can think of some parallels. That Idi Amin he was dictator of Uganda. He had a dream that told him he should kick all of the South Asian community out of Uganda. So the next day, because he's a dictator, he does it. All his advisors are like, no, no, no. They are the backbone of business and commerce. This will be ruinous. Doesn't
Mm.
care. So he kicked them all out. He gave them, I don't know, like whatever, 60, 90 days to leave. And indeed, it tanked the economy. And he had to invite them back. So the one thing that we find is that because they have these propaganda machines that tell us how successful they are, my new research is building on what I had in Strongmen, saying that they're actually becoming way more weaker because the toll of their capricious and impulsive things that we can think of, Trump and the tariffs, is harder to hide. And so if we look
Mm.
around, you know how Xi Jinping, he had like a convocation of all the leaders for his military parade. Well, if you think about the people who were there, Modi, he lost his parliamentary majority. Orban now has a major challenger of Peter Magyar. Look what's happened to Bolsonaro, who has been out of office, but that's for his whole cause. Putin is riding high with his approval rating, but Russia's become an economic client of China. People don't really know this, but it's completely dependent economically on China. And even Xi Jinping the economic downturn has forced him he's lost a lot of legitimacy, which is why he's becoming more repressive.
Mm.
So autocrats are not doing that well. And that's also why they're becoming more aggressive, and they're working together more because individually they're weaker.
And which is why the United States, as you and I have talked about, has become a haven for those that are international criminals. Let's talk about Bolsonaro, because the former president of Brazil, from January of 2019 to December of 2022, was just sentenced to 27 years in jail after having been convicted for plotting a coup. Now, this is Jair Bolsonaro. And, just the last 24 hours, the United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio has now announced sanctions on the wife of Brazil's Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, who presided over Bolsonaro's trial that justice himself says the sanctions against his wife were illegal and regrettable. But they're not taking it lying down, as in Brazil, because they have now also said that they are charging the son of former President Jair Bolsonaro. The son's name is Eduardo. He's hiding out here in the United States. They have now charged him with the crime of coercion because he repeatedly acted to subject the interests of the republic to personal and family agendas. I mean, Ruth, we could just plug and play the Trump family for the Bolsonaro family, but we have to give credit where it's due that Brazil said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to allow coups against our governments.
And if we look at Brazil's history, there's a really good reason why they took such a different path from the United States. They had a military coup in 1964 that led to over 20 years of horrible dictatorship with people disappeared, torture. And the political class in charge now, including Lula da Silva, were alive because it only ended in 1985. Very recent. So they know very well the toll of not holding people accountable. And new research by political scientists on how do you stop democratic backsliding? How do you stop this drift into authoritarianism? One of the biggest things is this kind of gatekeeping and accountability, all the things we didn't do, right, in the United States. So they have proceeded, not only did they immediately take a very wide frame at prosecuting people involved in the January 2023 insurrection in Brazil, where and this was a copycat of January 6th.
That's right.
And Steve Bannon, Jason Miller met with Brazilian officials to kind of school them on this. And who is the big liaison between the Brazilians and the Americans? It's Eduardo Bolsonaro, the son who was just charged. He was at the White House on January 5th, meeting with Jared Kushner and Ivanka, but he was there the day before our coup attempt. And so there's a long history. And so then when Bolsonaro was there was, threats to imprison him and charge him, or convict him, and have a long sentence. Eduardo actually came to the United States to lobby for retaliation of America. And this is all what we call personalist rule, where for a certain type of autocrat, policy becomes a personal affair, and the priorities of the family are supposed to dictate foreign and domestic policy. And what we're seeing here, and this is why the Brazilians are striking at Eduardo too, is an example of that.
Yeah, and I thought it was great that the current president of Brazil did an op-ed in the New York Times on September 14th in the wake of the conviction of the former president, Jair Bolsonaro. And the current president said, I am proud of the Brazilian Supreme Court for its historic decision on Thursday. This was a couple of weeks ago, which safeguards our institutions and the democratic rule of law. This was not a witch hunt. The judgment was the result of proceedings carried out in accordance with Brazil's 1988 constitution, to your point, enacted after 2 decades of struggle against a military dictatorship. It followed months of investigations that uncovered plans to assassinate me, the vice president, and a Supreme Court justice. Authorities also discovered a draft decree that would have effectively annulled the 2022 election results. I mean, Ruth, it gives me the chills because the parallels are so profound between us and January 6th and our insurrection in 2021, and obviously what happened in 2023 in Brazil. But to have the strength and the wisdom and the judgment of a president of a country that has gone through so much turmoil economically and politically, but for him to remind all of us that the safeguarding of our institutions and the democratic rule of law is something that goes beyond and above personal gain. I mean, it is obviously something that we want to have here in the United States. So Ruth, again, we love to have solutions here. How do we regain our footing? This has only been 8 months of a Trump term 2.0. And, several of us feel like we're kind of on our back heels right now.
Well, there's a good reason for this. And in my estimation, having studied so many, dictatorships, how they get started, what we are living through in the United States is very rare, actually. The pace of change, both foreign policy and domestic aggressions, does not resemble other autocrats today who came to power via election. If you look at the
Mm,
first 9 months of Putin or Orban or others, they did not proceed so quickly. And even those who had been in power before and came back, they did not proceed so quickly. And so the pace of change we're living through is more like when people come to power via coup, or even Anne Applebaum has rightly compared it to like a foreign occupation. So where they go immediately. Now, they were able to do this because they were in power before, Trump 1.0, and also there's going to be books written about this,
mm.
use their time out of power brilliantly.
Ah,
And the state of Trump's personality cult, it's very difficult to keep a personality cult so robust when you're out of power that some people, because they had the election denial, some people thought that he was always the rightful president. And they even had like a shadow government in the form of the Heritage Foundation, which was doing Project 2025. And
gotcha.
Orban legitimized this whole state of affairs when he came to the States 2 times during Biden's presidency. He refused to meet with Biden. He never went to the White House, Orban, which is a total breach of protocol. Where did he go? He went to Mar-a-Lago to see the pretend, rightful heir of the presidency, Trump, and he went to the Heritage Foundation. So they used their time out of power really well, and they were planning all of this. So it wasn't only Project 2025. We all spread the alarm about, right, on television and elsewhere.
Mhm.
And so they hit the ground ready. And that's why, as you said, we feel like we're taken aback now. So what can we do? We have to use one of my maxims is you use every tool and space you have at your disposal when you're resisting. And so everybody can find a way to push back that they're comfortable with. Some people will be in the streets. We've just seen the power of economic boycotts and consumers in getting Disney and ABC to bring Jimmy Kimmel back.
Yep.
So there are many, many ways that we can resist, and none of it is futile. That's the message.
And I feel almost validated because you and I obviously have not coordinated this, but I have been saying that people need to be engaged, but they shouldn't be judged for their level of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Your engagement can look different. Perhaps you're not
Right.
comfortable going to the streets, but perhaps you are comfortable doing a book club or a writing campaign or something of that ilk. But just being engaged counts. And that we are not here to judge what you are doing as long as you're doing something in the defense of and in the advancement of democracy. And so I feel if somebody as smart as you, Ruth, is saying that that makes sense, and I feel, like I said, a little validated. Ruth, where can people follow you? You have an exceptional Substack. I feel spoiled that we've had the privilege of your time this way. This is one of the luxuries I think independent media affords, that you and I could spend more time than just 5 minutes on a quick hit, right, on cable TV.
Yeah.
Where can people not only continue to read what you're doing, but also follow you so that they can get smarter?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. I have a Substack called Lucid, as in clear thinking. And that's where I'm actually doing almost all of my writing and thinking these days on Brazil, on the United States, and on how we can understand autocracy and democracy better. So Lucid, you can sign up, and I have weekly Q&As for paying subscribers where you can ask me questions. I'm also on Instagram, on Blue Sky, on X, Ruth Ben-Ghiat. So that's where to find me.
Well, Ruth, I will underscore. This is probably one of my favorite conversations that I've ever had. You bless me and others with your wisdom and your just this the depth of your historical insight. I mean, it's pretty overwhelming because there are lessons from which we can learn if we're paying attention and if we're being honest about assessing the role of history and where we find ourselves now. So, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, thank you for the privilege, truly the privilege of your time today.
Thank you, Katie. It's been a delight.
Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.